A particular stage in the process of differentiation between the functional and the material value of money is indicated by those cases in which a certain kind of money is used as a standard of value but not for actual payments. Money cannot exercise the function of exchange without at the same time measuring values, but the latter function is in certain respects independent of the former. In ancient Egypt, prices were determined by the uten, a piece of coiled copper wire, but payments were made in all kinds of goods. In the Middle Ages, price was often determined in money terms, but the buyer was free to pay in whatever manner was convenient. In many places in Africa at the present day, the exchange of goods is carried out according to a monetary standard which is sometimes quite complicated, while money itself, for the most part, does not even exist. The business of the very important Genoese exchange market in the 16th century was based upon the standard of the scudo de marchi. This standard was almost entirely imaginary and did not exist in any actual coinage. 100 of these scudi were worth up to 99 of the best gold scudi. All obligations were expressed in scudi de marchi and, as a result of its ideal character, this standard of value was absolutely stable, unaffected by the fluctuations and inconsistencies of actual currencies. The East India Company, in order to counteract the debasement, depreciation and counterfeiting of Indian coins, introduced the rupee current, a coin that was not minted at all but corresponded to a definite amount of silver, and simply provided a standard by which to measure the value of the actual debased currency. Through the existence of such a stable ideal standard, the actual coins also attained a stable relative value. In this way, a state of affairs was very nearly established, which a theorist of the early 19th century conceived. He regarded all money, whether coined or in other forms, as a claim upon exchangeable goods, and finally arrived at the negation of the reality of money. Money in the strict sense is contrasted with the currency, which is simply the claim expressed in money terms, while money itself is only the ideal standard by which all property values are measured. Here, the principle of the scudo de marchi has become a general theory. Money has been idealized to a pure form and a concept of relation, so that it is no longer identical with a tangible reality but relates to the latter as does an abstract law to an empirical case. In the cases cited above, the function of measuring value has been separated from its material representative. The coin used for calculation is deliberately set in opposition to the metal coin, in order to establish its position beyond the sphere of the latter. In this relationship, the ideal money fulfills the same purposes as good money, which is good only because it is a reliable measure of values. This leads us to the subject of the representation of money values by equivalence, insofar as this illustrates that one of the essential services performed by money is to make values more mobile. The more the significance of money as a means of exchange, a standard of value, and a method of storing value increases in relation to its material value, the more easily it can circulate in the world in a form other than metal. The same development that leads from the rigidity and the substantial determinateness of money to the representation of money occurs also in these representations themselves, for example, in the evolution of the bill payable to the bearer from the promissory note given by one individual to another. The various stages of this development have still to be traced. The stipulation, in the acknowledgement of a debt, that the bearer as well as the original creditor is entitled to collect the money, is found already in the Middle Ages, but its object was to facilitate collection of the debt by a representative of the creditor, not to allow the transfer of the value. This purely formal mobility of paper values was given a more real content in the French billet en blanc, which was current on the stock exchange in Lyons. It was still worded to refer to an individual creditor, but without specifying his name. Only after a name had been inserted in the vacant space was the individual creditor determined. The trade in bills of exchange was first properly established in Antwerp in the 16th century. Initially, they were often rejected at the due date if they were not accompanied by a note of transfer, and an imperial order had to be issued asserting their general validity. Here we have a very clear succession of stages. The value in question is, as it were, confined between the creditor and the debtor by the individually designated promissory note. It acquires mobility first of all by becoming payable at least to another person, although still on the account of the original creditor, and this process is then extended by postponing, but not yet eliminating the designation of an individual creditor, until finally the value becomes completely mobile with the bearer bill, which can change hands like a coin. This appears as the reverse, or the subjective, aspect of the development that we observed in respect of state treasury bonds. Inasmuch as these bonds were ultimately redeemable from general state revenues rather than specific revenues of the crown, they lost their rigidity from the point of view of the debtor. They emerged from their confined sphere into the general movement of the economy and became much more mobile representatives of value because a test of their particular worth was no longer needed. The general acceleration in the circulation of values also determines the relationship between the material and the function of money. In opposition to a one-sided interpretation of the relation between money and money substitutes, it has been asserted that the latter, cheques, bills of exchange, warrants and transfers, do not replace money but only give rise to a more rapid circulation. This function of money representatives is well illustrated by the fact that bank notes change consistently from large and slowly circulating values to smaller values. The Bank of England did not issue notes under £20 before 1759, while the Bank of France issued only 50-franc notes up to 1848. The money substitutes make it possible for the individual to dispense with a large reserve of cash, but the main advantage is that the available money can now be used in other ways, for example by the banks. What is economized is not money itself, but its use as a passive reserve of cash. It may be noted more generally that credit and cash do not simply replace each other, but that each produces a more lively activity of the other. At times when there is most cash on the market, credit activities also often expand exuberantly, even to a pathological degree, as in the 16th century when large imports of precious metals were associated with a vast and insecure expansion of credit and feverish activity in company promoting in Germany.